faith formation group every year put on a talk between the Feast of Christ the King and the first Sunday of Advent. And it usually sets the scene for Advent. And there was nothing more appropriate this year than to have somebody come to us to talk about the Year of Mercy, which begins on the 8th of December this year and runs then for 12 months. And I don't say anything about the Year of Mercy because it's better to say it all. And I'm delighted, and I think we're very honoured as well. It's great to see so many of our colleagues, so many priests from other parishes and even outside the deanery be here. I think that's a testament to what we're expecting, not to put the expectations too high. But we have one of our own, Dr. Eamonn Conway from Mary Immaculate College in Limerick, to talk to us. So Eamon, first of all, thanks a million for coming and welcome, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks,
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the very kind invitation to be with you this evening. First of all, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
It's not too loud? Okay, well, we'll hope for the best. I might just bring it down a little bit. You probably have heard the story about the person who was invited to give a talk, like I was tonight, and he realised it didn't go down too well, with some people at least. So on the way out, he stopped and asked somebody, and said, you didn't seem to be enjoying that talk. And the man said, not really, but it isn't you I blame, it's those who invited you. So, compliments this way and complaints that way. It's a real privilege to be invited to speak with you, particularly on the Year of Mercy. And this is the first time I've been asked to speak on what I think will be a very important topic for, hopefully, for the whole of the year, the church year that's ahead of us. As we know, the church year begins on the first Sunday of Advent, which is in fact next Sunday. And officially the Year of Mercy begins on December the 8th. Now I was speaking to a colleague of mine about this only today, in fact. And he was wondering if we've got a certain sense of being tired of special years. For example, the Year of Consecrated Life is just coming to an end and so on. But at one level, it's a kind of a way the church tries to draw attention to some particular aspect of the Christian life and kind of refresh that and bring us to life in that regard in a new way. And Jubilee years are actually not as common as we might think. Officially, they only happen every 25 years. And in fact, this is only the third time in the history of the church that we've ever had an extraordinary Jubilee year. So it actually is quite an unusual thing. And as we'll see, in a way, it's not that I overheard, I was half listening as I was preparing my slides, somebody saying, well, you know, God's mercy is available to us all the time, why do we need a special year for it? And that's absolutely true. But it's really about deepening our own openness to God's mercy and maybe, again, realising the freshness and the value and the importance and indeed how that can transform our lives. So I'd be very much a supporter of the way maybe many of the things we do already, we're going to continue doing them, but with this particular ear to the concept of mercy, that we're that little bit more attentive to it. What I propose to do tonight is just to speak to you for probably about 35 minutes maybe. I don't want to strain your attention spans this hour of the evening. And then give you time to discuss a little bit among yourselves. I might actually suggest a discussion question. I think the microphone's a little bit too high, the volume is a little bit too high. If somebody might like to lower it. I have lowered it down here, but it's not changing that. So then, obviously, a chance to feedback and ask me any particular questions you wish. Maybe the first thing I want to do is draw your attention to the fact that there's a very special website for the Year of Mercy. And I'm just going to open it up. That's the actual address for it. But I'm just going to open it up here. If the computer's still working. Yeah, that's it there. For any of you involved in trying to organise things or arrange things, there's loads of resources, tons of them, in all the different languages. Obviously, in our case, we're particularly interested in English. And very much the idea of pilgrimage is at the heart of the Year of Mercy. And of course, here Westport, you've got your own wonderful, you're the home really of the pilgrimage of Kirkpatrick. We might talk about that in a little while. So all the documents, the symbolism of the Year of Mercy, what's called the Bull of Indiction, it sounds terribly painful, but that's actually the document that was Pope Francis issued last April to announce the Year of Mercy. I will be referring to that in a moment. And the different events that are scheduled internationally are all up here. So I very much suggest to those who might be involved in trying to organise anything, give that website a good run over. I just mentioned it now because it's the sort of thing I might forget to say later on. So the web address is there. It's very simple, www.im.va, which is rather strange, but that's it. I forgot to say, if you have a weapon of mass disruption, otherwise known as a mobile phone, now would be a good time just to check that it's on silent or off. Okay, so we're going to continue then with the presentation. There we go. So, as I said, this is the third ever extraordinary Jubilee in the history of the Church. And why has Pope Francis called it? Well, I'm going to come back on that point again, because actually the concept of mercy is very, very much, as we know, at the heart of Pope Francis' whole ministry. But in a sense, the official reason he's given is up on the slide there, to entrust the life of the Church and all of humanity and the entire cosmos to the Lordship of Christ, asking him to pour out his mercy upon us like the morning dew, so that everyone may work together to build a brighter future. And I just want to draw your attention to those three, if you like, constituencies that Pope Francis draws our attention to. First of all, the life of the Church. That's presumably most, if not all of us here tonight, see ourselves as members of the body of Christ, we call the Church. But he actually makes an appeal to all of humanity. And it's interesting, in the little bit of research I've been doing about this, the number of non-believers or non-committed Catholics, the members of other religions who said we desperately need to bring a sense of mercy into our society. That we have become a very hard and harsh and crude and unforgiving culture. And indeed, Pope Francis, in the wake of these utterly heinous attacks in Paris, there were obviously security concerns for any gathering of people now, and the Year of Mercy will be a major gathering point in Rome for pilgrimages and so on. And he said we need an offensive of mercy, particularly in the face of that kind of gratuitous evil, really. So far from seen as retreating from this, all the more the demand for mercy is there. It reminded me a bit of a famous phrase of St. John of the Cross. I spelled that out a little bit, St. John of the Cross, because last year in class, in an exam paper I got back, as Jonathan Cross once said. But St. John of the Cross once said, where you do not find love, put in love, and you will draw love out. And of course, our own natural reaction when we don't find love is to protect ourselves, to shirk away from the vulnerability of being hurt or wounded in some particular way. But I suppose at least we know that the God we believe in is one where God does not find love in us. God puts in more love to draw love out. And that's in a sense what we're called to do in a particular way in this year. And it really is a time for us to witness as Christians to a God of mercy. So there's an internal challenge for us here as the Church. Then there's, as a sense, Pope Francis has already found an echo for this with the rest of humanity. And then indeed the whole of the cosmos, he says. If you have, and I would certainly encourage you to read Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical, which is not just on the care of the earth. People have heard it maybe that way. It's actually on the subtitle is Care for Our Common Home. But it's as much about human ecology as it is about bioecology. It's about all living creatures. And indeed a sense of the need for mercy to the whole of the cosmos as well. So these three different constituencies are very, very important to Pope Francis. So a Jubilee year is a year of particular prayer for pardon from God, for blessing from God, for the forgiveness of sin. And as I say, normally Jubilee years only happen every 25 years, and this in fact is an extraordinary year, Jubilee year. Now, the title of the document has in the first sentence of the one he used to announce this, the face of God's mercy. The face of God's mercy. And so, Misericordiae Vultus, that's the title of the document. There are maybe three particular aspects to this. Mercy, first of all, is the great and wonderful quality of our loving Father. That it is the characteristic of the God of Jesus Christ. Mercy. The characteristic of God the Father. The second asks us to be aware that mercy is readily available to us if we can just find in ourselves the courage and the humility to ask for it. And of course already maybe biblical stories, New Testament stories are coming to mind as we hear the idea of a forgiving Father and finding in ourselves the courage to ask for that mercy. And then the church is called in a particular way to mirror that mercy, to embody that mercy. We call it to be the sacrament of Christ, to represent that mercy in the world. So we might be wondering, as I say, why now? Why mercy? Why now? I think it would have been impossible for Pope Francis to have got through his papacy without putting mercy at the heart of it. It has really characterized his ministry as a priest and as a bishop all his life. If you look at and read any of his biographies, any of the accounts of his life, witnessing to and struggling in his own life, he's been quite open about it, to accept God's mercy and live out of that mercy has been characteristic of his life. So it would have been impossible really for Pope Francis not really to put the concept of mercy at the heart of his pontificate. And each pope brings something of themselves to the leadership of the church at a particular time. And maybe it's a challenge always for us to be open to that. Maybe it isn't always what we want. American Archbishop Chaput has said, that, quoting Chesterton, who once said, the church doesn't always get the saints it wants, but maybe it gets the saints it needs at a particular time. Similarly, we don't always get the Pope we want, but maybe we get the Pope we need at a particular time. And I know there are many people who don't necessarily find everything that Pope Francis is challenging us towards as easy to take. But they have to reflect on, and we all have to reflect really on, how is this challenging us in terms of our own relationship with God. Okay, I want to just deepen that a little bit by drawing your attention to this painting. I'm not sure whether the light here allows you to... Yeah, I think the light here is actually quite good. I actually saw this painting last week. I happened to be in Rome. There was a conference on Catholic education, and I took a colleague of mine who had never seen it to the Church of St. Louis of France, which is just off the Piazza Navona in Rome. And that church is near where Pope Francis used to stay when he went to Rome. He used to stay in a house for clergy quite nearby. And he tells the account of why this painting means so much to him in one of the early interviews he gave, which was to America Magazine. And in fact, this painting accounts for his motto as a bishop. Pope Francis has as his motto as a bishop in Latin, misereando atque eligendo. Okay? And there we have the word for mercy already, or a variation of the word for mercy in that motto. So his episcopal motto actually contains the word mercy. The phrase itself comes from an account of the calling of Matthew, from the Gospel of Matthew, an account of that by a doctor of the church, St. Venerable Bede, who uses this phrase, miserando atque eligendo. Now, how we might translate that, we have to use bad English to get it right. It means being mercied. It's kind of that sense of having mercy overflow upon us. And the experience of being called, eligendo, elected, we might say in English, or selected, at the very same time. So Pope Francis, if we'd like to look at the painting for a moment, Pope Francis gives a little account of what it means to him. It's in a very dark part of the church in St. Louis Church in Rome. It's in a very dark part of it. You actually have to put 50 cents in the meter every couple of seconds and of course if you're smart you wait around for somebody else to put it in. They were more like Matthew the tax collector, of course. So Pope Francis gives a lovely account of this, and he says Matthew, he sees himself in Matthew more than in Christ. And this look on Matthew's face of, who, me? Me? You're calling me to leave my money, to leave my security? Me who is mean and grasping, and so the sense of shock, surprise at being called. And they, I don't know if any of you have had in your life of that sense of utter unworthiness, and yet of grace at the same time, and that the call somehow overtakes you, and it humbles you, and it kind of empowers you at the same time. So for Pope Francis, this painting is very, very meaningful. Here's the finger of Christ. We don't quite get to see the face of Christ calling him, and Matthew perplexed a little bit, and having to find himself, I suppose, the courage to leave the security of his possessions, of his role, and allow himself to experience the mercy of Christ. And this experience of being mercied, enabling him to respond at the same time. So for Pope Francis, this is a very important painting. Caravaggio's The Call of Matthew. And he has referred to it a few times. Again, if you go to the website I just showed you, it's one of the images that they have up there. So for Pope Francis, this was very important. I have just his exact words here. He says in that interview, which was in 2013, very shortly after he was elected, he says, "I am one who is looked upon by the Lord. I always felt my motto, miserando atque elegendo, by having mercy and by choosing him, was very true for me." The motto is taken from the homilies of Bede the Venerable, who writes in his commentary on the Gospel, Jesus saw a publican, and since he looked at him with feelings of love and chose him, he said to him, "Follow me." The Pope adds that this is very impossible to translate. I like to translate it by the word mercying. He said, "I always stayed near where this painting was. The finger of Jesus pointing at Matthew, that's me. I feel like him, like Matthew. It is the gesture of Matthew that strikes me. He holds onto his money as if to say, no, not me. No, this money is mine. Here, this is me, a sinner on whom the Lord has turned his gaze. And this is what I said when they asked me if I would accept my election as pontiff." So I suppose if we want to try to make this our own, maybe we think of what is it that we're possessing or holding on to that might even make it hard for us to be touched by the mercy of God. What is it maybe we need to just leave aside and maybe momentarily experience the vulnerability of being insecure, that nonetheless opens us up to a horizon of love and mercy and forgiveness and healing, that maybe even now, as we grasp our false securities, we find it possible even to imagine. I think that's the invitation that this painting and, in a sense, Pope Francis is inviting us to take the risk of letting. It might even be that we're holding on to a sense of being able to earn our own forgiveness, earn our own eternal keep, rather than really realise that whatever we have and whatever we are is always a gift. And the vulnerability that in a sense calls us to accept. It's really about accepting our creatureliness, that we are creatures, that we are interdependent creatures, entirely dependent upon the mercy of God. So that's a painting you might like to just reflect a little bit upon yourself. So the Pope's wishes are that this year may be dedicated to living out in our daily lives the mercy which the Father constantly extends to all of us. A time when the people of God may experience their share in divine mercy, and an opportunity for Christians to show God's mercy to others. So that's in a sense repeating what I said a little bit a while ago. It's for humanity, but we, as Christians, have a particular role of witnessing this mercy to others. Now, one of the points that's coming up in discussion, even among theologians a little bit at the moment, is how is mercy different from forgiveness? Is that all we're talking about when we talk about mercy? Is it just another word for forgiveness? And actually, it's not. It may take the form of forgiveness, if forgiveness is what is needed. But even people who may not necessarily need to be forgiven need to experience God's mercy. And Pope Francis, in the document he wrote for announcing the Year of Mercy, draws our attention to all kinds of places and people who need an experience of mercy. It's something more than forgiveness, he says to us. It's closer to the way God forgives. It's in a sense, in the face of our sinfulness, God's love takes the form of mercy. But it's God's whole response to human fragility, human brokenness, human pain. It's what looking at fragile, puny humans who may have done awful things to each other, who may be the victims of awful things being done to them. It's the form God's love takes in the face of a broken humanity. So it's not just about forgiveness. It's a whole turning of God's love in that self-emptying way. It has the word heart, the Latin word has the word heart in it. It's in a sense that heartfelt response. I imagine it just like how a mother or a father, when they see a child or their child in pain and in agony, maybe something they've done to cause themselves, or maybe not. Whether they have or they haven't, they're suffering. And the response is that one of mercy. To try to do anything they can to alleviate that pain and that suffering. So mercy is a broader concept than forgiveness. But it may include forgiveness, it may need forgiveness. But it's more than forgiveness. And the other point maybe that needs to be made, I can't remember whether I have it elsewhere in the slides, is that mercy and justice are not opposed to each other. And maybe at times, obviously justice must be honoured, but mercy is more than justice. But they're not opposed to each other. You can be both merciful and just at the same time. They're not opposed to each other. So just a few concrete bits of information. As Charlie said in the introduction, 8th of December, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, which is also the 50th anniversary of the closing of Vatican II. So it's the beginning kind of a new chapter in the life of the Church. And then it'll conclude on the Feast of Christ the King, which is the same feast we celebrated just last Sunday. And so the Church is going to engage in many different kind of symbolic activities, in a sense, to try to make this real, and try to appropriate liturgically, ritually, the experience of God's mercy. Now, first of all, we really have to buy into this ourselves. No amount of ritual or activity, if we haven't actually opened our own minds and hearts to this, will actually touch us and lead us along. But also as a church, as a community, there are ways we can work together and support one another in experiencing God's mercy. And so the Pope in the document has mentioned a number of particular ways. One symbolism we always use, I suppose just before I get on to those, just a few points. First of all, obviously, the fact that at the centre of this year is Jesus, our merciful Saviour, He is the face of God's mercy, the great forgiver. Again and again, in the Gospels, we are told He was seen, me has seen the Father. In the preface of Christmas, I love that, Christmas at midnight Mass, you'll hear this. In the wonder of the Incarnation, you have brought to the eyes of faith a new and radiant vision of your glory. In Him, we see our God made visible and are caught up in love of the God we cannot see. Jesus makes visible for us the God we cannot see. So, in a sense, if we want to imagine what it's like to experience the mercy of God the Father, just look at how Jesus related to people. Look at actually what Jesus realized for people. In a sense, he put flesh and bones on the mercy of God the Father. And so there are a number of stories that Jesus told, which have at their heart to help us to understand God's mercy. And the stories we're all familiar with. But you may want to reread them with an ear, particularly say, how is this showing an aspect of the mercy of God? So if the story clearly straight away, the story of the prodigal son. And I didn't delay on, we'll come back on it, but the beautiful logo here, it seems to me it conjures up two different stories. One is possibly the prodigal son. There's another possible story here, I'm not sure. The person who designed it, I don't think has given a definitive explanation, which is probably a good thing, because it allows us to imagine. But maybe towards the end we'll see, does anybody see another possible story in it? I think clearly the prodigal son is there, but there might be another one. The woman taken in adultery, the sinful woman, the good thief, the story of Zacchaeus, who considered himself utterly unworthy, the paralyzed man. So they're not all about cases of people needing forgiveness. There are people who needed healing. There are people who needed to be restored. What I love about that opening part of Luke's Gospel, when the disciples of John the Baptist come to Jesus, and they say, are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for somebody else? And Jesus doesn't say, yeah, sure I am. Who did you think I was? But he says, look around you, what do you see? He says, the blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, and the poor have the good news preached to them. In a sense, they're acts of mercy, where people are being restored, because of course blindness and lameness and deafness and dumbness were not just causes of exclusion, which they are, and certainly particularly in that culture, but in that culture they were also seen as punishments from God very often. There were ways in which people interpreted them as somehow God's disfavour, or that not maybe that person who sinned, but maybe somebody in their previous generation was being that this was a punishment on the family or the ancestry. So, in a sense, by Jesus recognizing these people, by Jesus touching them, by Jesus reaching out to them, he was restoring them to a sense of their dignity. That's an act of mercy. And of course, this has been a big theme for Pope Francis. Again and again, he speaks about what he calls the throwaway culture. And he talks about how people are thrown away. He talks about the different ways in which we discard one another. The different ways we exclude one another. So all of these things are very much at the heart of Pope Francis. So again, if we're thinking about how we might realize the year of mercy, maybe again think about the ways in which people can be discarded in our throwaway culture. Pope Francis thinks very much about young people, but he actually talks also a lot about the elderly. It's interesting at World Youth Day, for example, in Rio, 3 years ago, 2013 I should say, he spoke to the young people a lot about the elderly and the need to learn from the wisdom of older people and respect the wisdom of older people, which is very important. So as I said to you, there'll be a lot of symbolic actions, and just in the last few days, they have reopened. In this picture here, you see them reopening a special door. It's a form of a symbol really. But on December the 8th, Pope Francis will open the door that's only open for jubilees at St. Peter's Basilica. Okay, so it's only open on these very special occasions. So when there's a jubilee year, and it's a symbolism again of the church opening its doors of a new avenue to God's mercy, a new way of experiencing and receiving God's mercy. Similarly, there's a door at the Basilica of St. John Lateran, which in fact was walled up. So what you see going on here is it's usually only every 25 years, the door is walled up in the intervening period. And here you see the workmen in the last few days have been removing the wall. so that this door will be open. And again, it's kind of a symbolism of removing walls, the various kind of walls that divide us, the walls that we've put up between us and other people. So the idea of an open door, Pope Francis very explicitly says, and this is again nothing new in the year of Jubilee, that every particular church, every cathedral should open a special door. I don't know what's going to happen in the cathedral in June. I haven't been looking too closely, but I presume there will be a door that will be opened, that is normally opened, which is this symbolism of us having a new openness to God's mercy. And so there'll be a set of prayers, usually, that you go through this door, you say certain prayers, kind of a passion of prayers, again as a kind of a pilgrimage. Not everybody will want to or can make their way to St. Peter's Basilica or to St. John Lateran to engage in the pilgrimage there, but they shouldn't have to either. They should be able to do it in their own diocese. So the door through which anyone who enters will experience the love of God. So the opening of these doors in every diocese will be part of what we're going to do. But again, the emphasis is hugely on pilgrimage. And I was saying to Charlie, I see a great business opportunity for Westport in this. I think we need actually to work on the concept of pilgrimage. I'm a great devotee. I've done Kirkpatrick a few times, but I'm a great devotee of Lough Derg. I work there most summers. And I think we're uniquely well placed in Ireland in terms of pilgrimage. Between Maulane up the road, Knock, Kirkpatrick, to name the ones in the west, and so on. I mean, there are so many beautiful pilgrimages. And I think pilgrimage appeals to a lot of, particularly young people in our culture today. Why do I think that? Because I think young people resist the idea of being tied down. The concept of community is a difficult one for them. But pilgrimage gives a kind of a transient sense of community. You're with other people, at least for while you're engaging with it, so it's not too threatening. And yet, it's mediating something of depth. It's mediating something of generations. And the line of the poem, generations have trod. And we can feel that. I find that, for example, on the Camino as well in Spain. You're absorbing something of the generations who have walked this same pilgrimage. As indeed, I'm sure many of you who have done Kirkpatrick or any of our other pilgrimages will feel the same. And I think there's a great way, maybe, if the pilgrimage places in Ireland work together this year. I was thinking, particularly for young people who like a challenge, if we had the 4 pilgrimage challenge, the 4 pilgrimages challenge or something, where they get a stamp each time they do one of our pilgrimages, and get maybe a certain kind of a reward or a certificate for that. Something just to think about. But it'd be great if Kirkpatrick or the Westport initiated this as a thing. But pilgrimage is going to be a very important part of this holy year, as indeed it is in most holy years, and has been down through the centuries of the Church. And again, for pilgrimage, of course, it's not the destination that matters, it's the journey. Isn't that right? It's actually the journey. It's what happens to you on the way, and what it opens up in you on the way. And of course, there'll be many people who physically perhaps can't pilgrimage, but maybe they can pray for those who can physically pilgrimage, and they can pilgrimage in their own way. They can pilgrimage in their own hearts. They can engage in that kind of a journey. So pilgrimage is going to be very important. In particular, Pope Francis has called for what he calls an initiative of 24 hours for the Lord, and this is to be celebrated on the Friday and Saturday of the 4th week of Lent, just preceding the 4th week of Lent. And again, this should be in every diocese. And he's hoping that it'll be a particular time when young people would come and pray before the Blessed Sacrament, remain in prayer for this extended period of time, and maybe also there'll be a real push on to celebrate the Sacrament of Reconciliation during that particular period. So that's again something to work towards, and that's the great thing about us gathering this early on to become aware of this, that we can reflect upon this and see how can we make that maybe something that'll be really, really special that we build up to. Now, the other thing Pope Francis is drawing our attention to is something that, as older generations hear a language you'll be familiar with, taking up the corporal and spiritual acts of mercy with joy. Now, who can name for me the corporal works of mercy? Go on, keep going. Feed the hungry. Visit the sick. Harbour the harborless. the dead. Visit the sick. I have to admit to you guys, I had to look this up. I belong to the generation that was misinformed and misread. So we got to feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, welcome the stranger, heal the sick, visit the and bury the dead. Isn't it a lovely list though, in a way, when you think about it? And no harm maybe to be reminded of these as the corporal works of mercy. It's a phrase most young people wouldn't be aware of. And certainly even I have to admit I had to make sure I had my notes. But again, maybe even to reflect on these. How good are we at these different things? Again, even the idea of remembering the dead, attending to our graveyards, that sense of connectedness with our forebears and so on. And then not to forget what we call the spiritual works of mercy. Now this is the honours course. Anyone want to have a go at the spiritual works of mercy? Go on.
The first one.
Sorry?
Support the church.
Support the church. Let me check, is that on my list? Maybe it should be, but it's not. Okay, this is definitely the honours course. To counsel the doubtful. Now, of course, the language might be different in different translations. To counsel the doubtful, instruct the ignorant, admonish sinners. Very good, well done. He gets the prize there. This one is for the car now. Comfort the afflicted or sorrowful, perhaps, yeah. Forgive offences, forgive sins. Pardon? Pray for the living and the dead is the last one for Jews. We just missed out on one. Now this is not an easy one. Bear patiently with those who wish us ill. You're not having that one at all, right? Sorry? It's the best one. Bear patiently with those who wish us ill. Or those who do us ill. So again, there's a certain wisdom in that, isn't there? But it's a very concrete way maybe of thinking of a kind of a checklist for ourselves in terms of how we might, even if we were to pick one of those, one that we might particularly find we could struggle with during the year of mercy. Maybe even take one of them each month or something like that as a form of personal sort of spiritual growth. And there are other things that are mentioned in the document as well. Turning to scripture, of course, we refer to some of the stories that particularly bring that out, and going out to the marginalised. And a phrase, of course, Pope Francis actually doesn't use the word evangelization very much. That was part of the previous pontificate. He loves the word missionary. And so here we see the missionaries of mercy. Seen ourselves as being on a mission. And of course, I know another time we might have thought of the parish mission or the foreign missions. But in the church of today, we're all missionaries. To be a Christian, in a sense, is to be a missionary. Being a Christian can never be a private thing. And so, in particular, during this Jubilee year of mercy, to be missionaries of mercy. So, going out to the marginalised, I say those in kind of a throwaway culture or a throwaway context.